After I did my fitting and I used my my chalk to basically make the outline of the pins that I did in the back, because most of the fitting that I had to do was in the back of my dress and actually just one spot over here on the side. I marked all of that and then I made the lines cleaner. So whenever I first took the top of the dress off after I did the fitting, this line was broken and parts of it would be further over and then it would maybe curve in a lot. So I just kind of went through with my chalk and made the line a bit more seamless. And then the next thing that you'll want to do is, if you basted your back pieces together, you'll want to remove that. So I've already removed the basting from this side over here. So I opened this back up by removing that basting. A fast way to do that, well, fast-ish, if you just take your top basting thread, just one piece by itself, and then just pull on it, you don't have to spend time cutting all of that out. Just be gentle with it so that you don't hurt your fabric, especially if you are doing this with silk or satin or anything like that. So if you just keep pulling that gently, eventually it will come out. Okay. And then your pieces will separate easily. There you go. Okay? So I am going to make my adjustment here at the side for my personal fit that I need, and then after that we'll move on to the next step. So I wanted to show this part in case any of you did your fitting like I did and you had basted the side. Right here where my pin is where I needed to make my alteration. So what I've done is put the needle in here where I did my permanent stitch, because if you remember I did that at the top of the shoulder seam, and I've already done a little back stitch there, and then I'm just going to start stitching and then bringing in the fabric here where this pin is, and then gradually moving back to my 5/8 seam. So once again, I already back stitched up there, so if you're doing this, you should do that too. I'm just going over where I had that pin, and then I'll gradually make my way back to the line here. And then I'll go right over that original 5/8, okay? So now I have a permanent stitch on one of my sides. So if you did this too, what you'll need to do now is remove your basting, and then you can try this on. I would recommend if you do alterations that every time you finish an alteration, you should try the garment on again and just make sure that it looks good and nothing's too tight or too loose. I know that my other side was just the way that I wanted it. So this side is perfect as it is, and it also is basted, so now I need to do a permanent stitch for it. So I'm just going to go right on top of that basting that I did, stitch, back stitch, and then just follow that stitching. And then you can see here, this is where my permanent stitch starts again. So I'm going to reach that permanent stitching there. Make sure that I'm not flipping my selvages to the inside here. Keeping everything flat. Stitch over that permanent stitching, back stitch a little, and stitch again. Okay? So that's good now. And then I also did that to my lining, so I have to do the same thing to my lining. So finding my permanent stitching, which is right here, stitching on top of that, back stitching, and then following that basting. And now I'll do the same thing for my other lining side. And this one you're going to see me curve in just slightly because this is the side where I had to make the alteration, and I know that it's right here. You can mark the inside of your lining too if you need to, but I know that I need to go in about right here, and it's right at the bust dart. So I'm just going to start aiming for that, taking it slightly in there, and then gradually after the dart making my way back to the stitching line. Okay, and there's my permanent stitch. So make sure once again to keep everything out of the way here because you're getting close to your shoulder seam and things get tight and bunched up there. Stitch a little, back stitch, stitch again. All right. So at this point, what you need to do if you did any of those same things that I did, you need to remove any bastings like this where you've made a new line. And then I would recommend, even if you didn't make any alterations, even if you just did a permanent stitch over your basting, just go press all of these open again. So press all 4 seams open again, and just to make your finished garment look as nice as you possibly can. And if you did alterations, I would recommend that you try it on again, just to make sure that everything is just the way that you want it. So with my first fitting done, I am finally comfortable with moving to step 26. So now we're just going to be attaching our skirt to our bodice piece. So here is my skirt, and I recommend that you flip everything right side out and just place it so that you know where things go. So if this is the front of my dress and this is the front of my skirt, that means that this seam has to get attached like so, right? So that once you sew this, it will open out like this. So once you know where things are supposed to be, the first thing you'll want to do is match up your darts and also your side seams. So this is the side of my bodice and this is the side of my skirt, and match those up. Make sure when you're matching these two, because when I first started sewing, I would match everything at the very edge like this. You actually don't want to do that. You want to try to match at the actual 5/8 inch mark, because you'll notice after you've been sewing for a while that if you don't do that, your seams won't always match up. So this is where mine needs to be. And as I have been doing for most of this project, make sure you pin both your selvages down just so that whenever you get ready to stitch them, you can make sure that they don't fold open or over each other, because you don't ever want to add more bulk to your seam than is already there. Okay, so there's one side seam. Now I'm going to match my other side seam. So here's the side of my bodice, and here is the side of my skirt. And I'm going to match them at where I believe about 5/8 is, which would be like maybe here. Just match up those lines. Great, okay? And then pin down the selvages there. Then you also want to match up your darts. So you have 2 darts in the front of your skirt, and you have 2 darts in the front of your bodice, and you just want to match those up. Once again, match up your seam lines at where you think about 5/8 is going to be. Make sure all of your darts are pressing in the direction they're supposed to. In this particular case, they should be pressed towards the front. So if you're looking at mine, obviously to the right, and then the others should point to the opposite direction, so to the left. And I'm going to match those up at what I think is 5/8 as well. And you'll also see when you do that, you have notches in your skirt and your bodice. See my notches here? They also now match up. Okay? And then you'll want to match up your darts that are also in the back pieces. So this is the back of my skirt, back of my bodice. Both the darts are pressing the same, both darts are pressed the same way. Match them up the exact same way at where you think about 5/8 is. And then pin those down. Let me do the dart on the other side now. They're both pressing towards the right. That's good. And then you'll also want to match up the edges as best you can. Okay, match up my other edge. And then once you've done that, it's just a matter of pinning the rest of it down before you sew it. And as I have been saying throughout most of this sewing tutorial, this one needs to go a little bit longer too. There we go. I will be putting in a lot of pins into mine just because my fabric has been somewhat beastly at this point. I feel comfortable calling that. This velvet has been beastly to work with. So I'm going to go through and just put lots of pins throughout this entire seam, and then I will take it to the sewing machine and I'll let you watch me sew it. Alright, so I'm ready to stitch my bodice and skirt together. As you can see here, because of my overly difficult fabric, I was very generous with the pins. So I'm also going to have to stitch over them because I had to do quite a bit of fabric fitting to get these pieces to line up really nicely. So here we go at a regular 5/8 inch stitch. I would not normally recommend that you sew over pins, especially this many, but I have to do that with this. And if your fabric is thick like mine, when you get to these darts, it's totally fine to lift up your foot and put it back down and help push the fabric through. Just don't push too hard. Just give it a little bit of help. Okay, lift up again. And then it also doesn't hurt. See this, how this wants to curve up like that? It's easy to actually sew through your skirt. So feel underneath every now and then and just make sure, or you can even hold your thumb underneath here as you sew to make sure that you're not stitching extra layers together. Here's another dart, so I'm going to keep lifting the foot up and setting it back down just to kind of give it some wiggle room there. See how this keeps wanting to bunch? That has been my beastly choice of fabric. So just keep stitching that. Go as slowly as you need to. And if you start to see your fabric pulling, just keep picking up that foot. Reaching another dart here, so I'll keep picking up the foot. Give my machine a little bit of support with my fingers there. The end is in sight. Okay. Keep feeling underneath that you're not accidentally sewing parts of your skirt that you're not supposed to be. Ah, see that? That's my selvage from my seam underneath, and it's trying to pop in there, so that is why we pin them down. Do a little reset with the foot there. almost there. And then do your little back stitch at the end there. Okay, now before you go any further, check to make sure that nothing looks weird in your seam. So flip it out, take a look. Looks good so far. See that, where my seams match up so nicely? That's why your pinning is so important. It's funny the people who think sewing that people won't notice that, but they will. Ah, see that one? I might take that one out and redo that one. So these don't match up perfectly, and I would really like for them to. Ah, and I have a little pucker right here. Okay, so those are the things you want to check for. So I'm going to flip this back out, and I won't show you guys this. I'm just going to do this. But if you have a little pucker or your seams don't match up, you can take out just that small section, reposition things, stretch them out a little bit if you need, and then restitch it so that it looks nice. Okay, other than those two spots, I'm happy with this. So I am going to readdress that, and then after I fix that, I'll continue on to the next step. So here's what your dress should look like after you have attached the bodice to the skirt, and I am pretty happy with this. If you haven't already, you'll need to press this open. So where you sewed your skirt and your bodice together, you need to press that open like that. And the next part that I am doing, which is totally optional depending on what you chose to do with the lining, whether or not you're adding a skirt lining like I am or not, I am now going to be attaching my lining the same way that I did the right sides of my fabric. So just going to flip this out. Here's my bodice with the right. Sorry guys, my mom is playing World of Warcraft and apparently having a hard time at it, so it's okay. It's more hysterical. I'm not cutting that, I'm leaving it in. Okay, so here's my bodice lining and here's my skirt lining. So I'm just gonna do the exact same thing, and I do this every time no matter how many times I sew a dress or skirt or whatever, just to always make sure and double check that I sew everything correctly. So I'm doing right sides together. This is what it would look like when it was done. So now I'm just going to flip that over, and then I know that this is how this goes. So I will take my pins now and I'm going to pin it the exact same way that I did the right sides of my fabric, matching my side seams first and then matching up my darts and then matching up the edges, and I'm going to stitch that the exact same way. So I'm not going to show that now because I just did that in the previous steps, but if you added a lining like I did, then please do this as well, and then come join me once you finish that. So this is what the dress looks like so far. If anyone is confused, this is my lining and the bodice and the skirt are attached, and then this is the right side of the fabric, bodice and skirt are attached. I just wanted to show you quickly as a reminder, it is important on your seam after you finish stitching it that you press it open, and then once you press it open, also press your seams towards the bodice. So this is the bodice and this is my skirt. Press your seam towards the top like that, and then once you've done that, you're going to do a second row of stitching right here next to that first one that you did. And that's just to give your dress more support. So I'm also going to do that for the lining, and then once that's done, I'm going to trim out all of this extra fabric from both pieces. Okay, so now I'm ready to put my zipper in the dress. I have already ironed the zipper, and I do have a separate video that will thoroughly go through preparing your zipper and installing it, and I'll link that below in the description if somebody needs that. But I'm just going to show quickly how I'm going to pin this in. The first thing that you should do if you haven't done already is, of course, iron your zipper out. And I'm using a nice invisible zipper here. The next thing I'm going to do is trim off some of the top here. So here's my stop, or my zipper head. It can't go past there, so I'm going to trim about half of that out. So just enough for me to put the hook and eye on it later. And then I'm going to lay the dress out as if it were ready to be worn, just as I've prepped all my other seams in a similar way, just to always make sure that I'm putting things in correctly. And here's my zipper. If it was going to be in the dress, would be like this. So I know if I need to get this seam to be hidden, then I need to put the zipper in like so. That way, whenever this gets sewn in and flipped back out, the zipper will be facing the correct way. So that is how I always mark my zippers. And then I'm just going to line the top up on the right side of my fabric here, matching it with this red line that I made during my fitting as close as possible. Okay. And you can pin this in if you need to and just keep going down. I'm only going to put one pin in because I do better with zippers if I just hold them as I stitch them in and just guide them along the line. So that's what I'm going to do for this first one. If you are not used to sewing or this is new for you, then I would recommend that you pin all of this. But I know that for me, I will do better not doing that. So I'm going to sew this in really quickly. If you need the full tutorial on how to put in an invisible zipper, that's linked below, so you can watch that. Okay, so I just finished installing the zipper on one side. Now I'm just going to go through and trim off my excess threads so that they don't get tangled up in my zipper later. Okay. So what I did was I followed the line that I had created for my fitting, and then once I got to the waist, I continued on down at a normal 5/8 inch seam. So now if I flip this over as if I were going to wear it, I can see that the zipper looks nice and is finished, and it's facing the correct way. So the next thing I would recommend you do is actually zip up your dress. Okay, at least just up to the waist point here, because you'll want to make sure that your seams match up again. That's always important. So I can see my red line is right here, so that is where my fitting is for that side. So this part of my zipper needs to match up with where I made my marking for my fitting, but it also needs to match up where the seam line is. This is easiest for me if I actually turn this inside out for a moment. Okay, and you can see my zipper here. This is my seam. This is the right side of my fabric on the other side. And this is, if you can see my seam here. So I want these to match up. So I'm just going to close that up a little bit more. Find my red marking where I did my fitting, which is right here. It's a little bit further in than 5/8. So I'm going to grab that. I'm going to match up that red mark here with my seam and my zipper. Okay? And then you can pin that in however is easiest for you. Ah, come here, pin. Okay. For me, that's going to be like this. Okay? And then just check it from the right side again, just to make sure that it matches. Okay, that's good. I'm going to unzip it. And I'm going to make that a little bit closer there to the actual zipper itself. Okay, that's better. Then I want to flip this out again. Just check again at the bottom. Go ahead and tuck in your extra tail here underneath so that it's ready for you to stitch it down, and you won't have to pull it out later and then tuck it in. That's always annoying when you have to do that. Okay? And then I would recommend that you just quickly go to your machine and just baste this closed, and then zip your zipper up to make sure that they match perfectly. And if they match, then you'll just go ahead and do the same thing that you did on this side, but for this side of your zipper, meaning that you're going to stitch it following your fitting line if you had to make any to the back of your dress. So I'm going to base this and make sure it matches first before I stitch in the zipper. Okay, so my zipper is in on both sides now. Now I'm just going to go in and trim out these extra threads. It's like I said earlier, you don't want to zip up your zipper and have those get caught in there. So try to trim out as many of those as you can find. Okay, I think I already did the other side, but let me just double check. Yes. Oh, here's one. And there's one. And I'm just going to zip this up really quickly. Voila, very pretty. You can see here that my seams match up. So now I just need to try this on and see how the zipper looks. Just make sure there isn't any fine tuning that I need to do. And don't worry that this is still open, we'll get to that in just a minute. I just tried the dress on and it fits really well. I'm very happy with it. So now I just need to close this up down here. So I still have my little peekaboo at the bottom here. So just flip that out so you can see what's going on the other side. What I need to do now is finish closing up this seam. So what I'm going to do is pull this out of the way and put on my zipper foot and just close up the rest of this seam from here on down. And this one I will probably pin quite a bit just to make sure everything lines up properly. So I'll let you watch me do that. Okay, so I've switched out my zipper foot here. So I'm still using the zipper foot, and I have this all pinned because I pinned my zipper together and moved it out of the way and then pinned it as much out of the way as I possibly could. What I'm going to do now is stitch next to this, which is why I still have the zipper foot on. Oh, that could have been terrible. Okay, here we go. Make sure it's on the right side. Okay, there, so whenever you put your zipper foot on, it should just hold the zipper right there. And then I'll stitch, do a little back stitch, and then try to fit in my extra fabric here. You can also base this first if you feel more comfortable doing it that way. Okay, and then you're gradually going to be tapering back to 5/8, which is right here. See, there's my 5/8. So, and then you're just going to meet up with your previous stitching. So this is the rest of your skirt that you already stitched together. Meeting up with that line. And then go over it for an inch or two, do a back stitch, okay? So this is what the finished zipper to the right side of the fabric looks like. If you can see here, my seams match up. They match up in the middle of the zipper. My darts match up. And then the rest of this is now closed off. So no more hole. And after I finished this, I also pressed it flat again. Now for the inside, I have my lining to deal with because I added a lining. So let me just flip all this out. Now, if you feel more comfortable or you just prefer to, you can hand stitch this closed. So this has already been sewn together just like you did the other piece, where the end of the zipper would be to the end. So all you'd have to do if you want to do this by hand is to just fold this over 5/8, or in my case I have to match it to what I did here, so about this much at this particular spot, and then pin it like this, and then you would just hand stitch it to the zipper. If you do decide to hand stitch, just make sure that when you're doing your hand stitching, don't stitch right on top of the zipper like this, because you'll just end up breaking your thread and hurting your dress later. So try to do it more on the outside, like here. That way you can always clear your zipper teeth without hurting your dress. Now, I want to do as little hand stitching as possible, so I'm not going to do mine that way. I'm actually going to flip mine out. So I've gone into the lining here and left the right side of the fabric. And I'm going to hold together the edges that I want to sew together. And then flip this out. I'm still holding the pieces together that I want. So I'm still holding the pieces that I want together. I'm going to stitch this with my sewing machine. And then once I've stitched it, I'll just flip it back out and it will be closed off. And it's easier for me this way too, since I did a fitting, because I can actually just match this up